chapter 3 and verse 15. Do you remember the promised seed? He has arrived. What does this have to do with Joseph? Here's what it has to do with Joseph. When you get to Genesis chapter 37, the promised seed is not Joseph, but Judah. Judah is a terrible man. We find that out in chapter 38. However, there's a famine coming, and two things have to happen. Number one, God's covenant people have to be rescued through the famine. And number two, Judah has to be redeemed so that he takes his rightful place. And the story of Joseph is all about how God does those two things. So that in chapter 45, when he sees his brothers again and identifies himself, he says, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. And he says, do not be angry with yourselves for what you did. And in that one paragraph, he says God 5 times. And here's what he says to them. God sent me here. But he goes beyond that. God sent me here for you, that I might redeem you, that I might save you. Because the story of Joseph is not about Joseph. The apex of Joseph's life is not serving Pharaoh. The apex of Joseph's life is when his bones are taken back to the promised land. Because he does not live for himself. He lives for God. If you look at the story of Joseph and what you take away is, I want the power. I want the prestige. I want the wealth. And I will do anything to get it. Then you've missed the story. You've missed the point. But if you look at the story of Joseph and say, I serve the God of the universe, who sits enthroned in the heavens and does whatever pleases him. And my desire is that he might use me for his glory. Then you got it. But be very careful. Because here's what we like to do. We like to look at this in just a snapshot in a moment of time. And if you look at it in a snapshot in a moment of time, here's what you think. God can use me just like he used Joseph, and maybe I will have some difficulties for a while, but it's all going to be okay very shortly. Newsflash. Joseph is in Egypt for 22 years before he sees his brothers and his father again. That's more time than most of you have been alive. 22 years. If God takes away 22 years of your dream, will you still trust him? Will you still love him? Will you still serve him? He's 17 years old when they put him in that pit. He's 30 when he's in leadership in Egypt. He's almost 40 by the time things are reconciled. Is that okay with you? Or are you like most of us? Because for most of us, if it's longer than a few days, it's too much hardship. And we shake our fists at God because we believe God owes us something. That's why we read the passage that we read earlier. And I will close with this by reading it again, and I hope you hear it with new ears. Listen to Romans chapter 8, beginning at verse 28. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought. Joseph would not, just never, at 17 years old, would Joseph have bowed his head and said, oh God, would you please make my brothers hate me? And God, would you please, as a result of their hatred, make them sell me into slavery, Lord? And not just any slavery, but could you send me to Egypt? And while I'm there, how about a decade in prison, God? No, Joseph's not praying that. Amen? Because he doesn't know However, he who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, not necessarily in a week. Sometimes it takes 22 years. For those who are called according to his purpose, not their own. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. That's your goal in life. To be conformed to the image of his Son. And if it takes hardship to conform you to that image, then you rejoice in that hardship. When I came to this school, I'd been a freshman All-American football player, an All-Southwest Conference football player, and I'd started preaching. And all of a sudden, everybody, not everybody, everybody, which is beyond everybody, everybody was calling me to come speak at their events. They wanted me to come preach for whatever. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I didn't grow up around Christianity or the gospel. I was raised in drug-infested, gang-infested South Central Los Angeles, California, by a single teenage Buddhist mother. I never heard the gospel till my freshman year in college. So when people started inviting me to come speak at different events, I realized I didn't know very much about what I was talking about. So I needed some training. I thought maybe I'd go to some other school and finish playing ball. Maybe I'd have to sit out a year, but of course I'd finish playing ball. I mean, come on. I was 18 months away from a 7-figure signing bonus. Of course I'd go somewhere and finish playing ball. God sent me here, where they didn't have a football team. Next football game I would play would be intramurals. And an interesting thing happened when I got here. My phone stopped ringing immediately. People didn't care what I knew. All they cared about was me carrying a piece of pig across a piece of chalk. And God crushed me. I was an instant nobody. And it was absolutely what I needed. To be conformed to his image. Because you see, when I was a ball player, all I ever talked about was me. I came here to prepare myself to tell a story not my own. To live a life devoted to another. I did not enjoy it. But I thank God for it. And it pales in comparison to 22 years as a slave and a prisoner in Egypt. I don't know what your goals or dreams are, but whatever they are, if God calls you to lay them down, you lay them down. There's a story far more important than yours. Don't you ever, ever forget that.